All right, last week we started talking about Joseph. We were in chapter 37 last week of Genesis. We're in chapter 39 this week. And we talked about a lot of the dysfunction in Joseph's family. He had, how would you describe his relationship with his siblings, especially his brothers? Toxic? Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, adversarial. Yeah, you know, when your brothers are willing to, throw you into a pit, and then willing to pull you out and sell you to, people that are just happen to be going by. Yeah, that's probably not the best relationship in the whole world. But Joseph was young. He was 17. He probably got under his brother's skin. How come he got under his brother's skin? Because he was his father's favorite. And Jacob made no bones about letting people know that. How did he let them know that? The coat of many colors, made a great Broadway play. So he was favored, he was abused, he was tempted, he was trusted, exalted, abased. Yet in no point in his 110-year life did Joseph ever seem to take his eyes off of God or cease to trust him. And we're going to see through this week and the coming weeks, there's been plenty of opportunity where I think a lot of people might have got angry with God, might have walked away, might have cursed God. There's a whole lot of opportunity for him, and yet he never does. He was given dreams that he shared with his brothers. That went really well. And the dreams had him bowing down before him. He was loved by his father Jacob, despised by siblings, despised so much that they wanted to kill him. Remember that? They were out in the fields and they sat down for a meal after they'd thrown him in the pit. These were callous people. They were cruel, jealous, not only of Joseph, but of Jacob. What did they do to Jacob after they've taken care of their brother? They lied to him about his death. They slaughtered a goat or a sheep and they dumped blood on the multicolored tunic that he was wearing, and they brought it. Check to see if this is your son's tunic. Not our brothers, your sons. Check to see that if this is your son. And as far as Jacob is concerned, he was dead. His grief and mourning was the same as if he actually had been killed. And then we read in the last verse of chapter 37 that the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer. And that's where we're going to pick up this week in chapter 39. Bart, if you would go ahead and read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 39. You're muted right now.
Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who'd taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master.
There's a couple of things we want to talk about here. First of all, and I was glad when I told Glenn this morning that he hadn't heard it, because I hadn't heard it till this week. The ancient Hebrew word for officer is actually literally translated eunuch of Pharaoh. Now, I know what you're thinking. You understand his wife a little more, right? But now, back in ancient Egypt, it was a practice of castrating your highest officers so that their loyalties in their eyes would only be on Pharaoh's needs. They didn't want anything distracting them. So that was a common practice. It's not said 100% that that's what he was. And the word does translate to officer as well. People in later translations use that. But there's every chance that Potiphar was a eunuch. Then in chapter 2, or verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. How many times have you found yourself in dire situations and you felt like the Lord was with you? Because I have a feeling that a lot of times when we're having tough times, we tend to think the Lord has abandoned us. The only time we give credit to God many times is when things are going really well. It's easy to give praise to the Lord when things are going well and you're on the mountaintop. But when you're being sold as a slave, I think that's why the Bible reminds us again and again in this chapter, God was with him. He was a successful man. So anyway, about Potiphar, I want you to keep that in mind. As we read through the story, I want you to keep that possibility that he was a eunuch. Not that it changes anything, but I just want you to, he also says that he was the captain of the guard, which would basically chief of police, if you will, which is not a great title to have these days in America. But more precisely, Potiphar was the head of Pharaoh's personal security force. Len.
John, you know, what's interesting about it, and I was reading this today, Max Lucado had an article on how do you, I don't know, anybody else see that? It was on Fox News. Yeah. Oh, yeah, how do you deal with crisis or trouble? And what's interesting is there is the fact of what God does, and then there is our perspective of what God does. And our perspective can either be negative or positive. So if you take a look at, for example, Joseph in prison, basically as a servant or a slave, his perspective could have been, look, where's God? What's happened here? Look at what he's done to me.
Yeah.
He put me in these circumstances. Or there's this perspective of, God has really blessed me. And what Max Lucado was talking about today, it's important for us in the United States to learn how to be thankful, because we're not terribly thankful. We take for granted, just like what happened in Lebanon and Syria, we take for granted our safety. And it's only when it's threatened that we start to think, you know, this could end. And I think that would force us to then think about whether or not we're going to be thankful or regretful.
Yeah, it's really easy to get complacent when you're in a good place. And I think this time that we're going through in America right now is an eye-opener for a lot of people, especially Christians. I think we're seeing this through the lens of God's eye in a way that maybe we hadn't before. But a lot of people don't look that way. You know, if you look at some of the research that gets done, what percentage of people do you think have a biblical understanding of the world? From what I read, it's about 9 or 10%. Okay, yeah, if that. I heard someone whisper, if that. So, yeah, I do think that this is a chance for us to all gain some perspective. But Joseph always seems to have his eye on God. He gives his best, even as a slave. It says Potiphar bought him. Think about that. He was a bought-in slave, and yet he worked, and we're going to see here, he worked as if everything was for the Lord. You know, we tend to easily see God being involved in, like I said, in success, but we complain when we're in terrible circumstances. Oh God, why have you done this for me? Oh God, why have you forsaken me in this situation? Oh God, how can you get me out of this situation? We're real quick on that, but our perspective when you're in the mountaintop is too easy to come by. Charles Spurgeon said, externally, it did not always appear that God was with him. That's an understatement. For he did not always seem to be a prosperous man. But when you come to look into the inmost soul of the servant of God, you see his true likeness. He lived in communion with the Most High, and God blessed him. That's a healthy perspective when you're in those circumstances. Another key point is some people think that they can't be blessed unless they're in authority. You know, anybody in business, you'll see that now and again. People that really, you know, I can't do this. I can't manage that project unless I'm in control of everybody else involved. Anybody relate to that in business? Well, I countered that time and time again. And the company I worked at, it was just an accepted practice that if I ask you to manage something, you're going to manage it. Whether these people work for you, report to you or not is irrelevant. Okay? But that's the way we are many times. What did Jesus say to the disciples at the Last Supper? What did he do for them? He washed their feet. And then what did he say to them? Do you understand what I've done for you? I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. And that's the situation that Joseph finds himself in. And that's exactly why you have so many comparisons about Joseph and Jesus. He has the heart of Jesus when it comes to servitude. He had a servant's heart. Bart, let's go ahead and move on and read verses 3 to 6.
When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome.
You're okay. Stop right there, Bart. We'll save how well built he was for the next section here. I started working for Samtec 1985. Within a short period of time, he had a core group of Christian believers that worked for him. And he would leave in November, go down to Florida. He wouldn't come back till May. He entrusted all that he had, because that business was all that he had. He entrusted it to a small cluster of people. I asked him one time why he hired Christians. He was very obvious with that in hiring Christians. Now, I'm not quite sure what his spiritual status was at that time. I know what it was at the end, but at that time, I don't think he was an overly godly man. But he recognized two things in Christians. A, they were hard workers, and B, I never had to worry about them taken from me. Those are the reasons. And I think God blessed his business because he had these Christians. You had Christians who were in the company that were praying for the business, working hard. And I don't know that he would have written that. And if he wrote a business book, I don't know if he wrote those words or not, but it was obvious to us what he was doing. Len.
John, when Danny first went to Wall Street, he was an investment banker at J.P. Morgan. And J.P. Morgan all over Wall Street had a reputation of being an ethical firm, a moral firm. And as it turns out, now they merged eventually with another one that wasn't so ethical. But as it turns out, that goes back well into history. J.P. Morgan himself used to hire seminary students for the same reason.
Same reason, yeah.
Trust them, he could believe in them, you didn't have to worry about his business, and they managed it well.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, back to, Sam, it was his business was blessed because of that. And the same is true for Potiphar. He saw that the Lord was with him. How do people see that the Lord is with you? Think about that. Potiphar, it says that he saw that the Lord was with Joseph. How do people see that in you?
Well, have you ever noticed in a business like I was in, where you had a lot of blue-collar fellas on the floor who were quite profane, when you walk into the floor, they change their language. You don't have to speak out loud to them or preach at them, but they know.
Yeah, I got a buddy who is a machinist and works on the machines at Samtec. He's still there. And it was the same thing. It's the same thing today with him. People will literally ask him, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" Why? Well, we know she don't swear. And he does, and he has a profound impact on people that he's working with because they see that. How else would someone recognize that the Lord is with you? Ken?
A little bit in an intangible way, your
Attitude?
something that doesn't lower stack over.
Yeah, I had attitude, work ethic, a servant's heart. That's easy to see. If you have a servant's heart, you can see that.
It says here with Joseph, everything he did was successful. So
Oh, yeah.
how you're
Everything was successful. And it says he made him the overseer of the house, and all that he had he put under his authority. Because of God's blessings and Joseph's faithfulness, God made sure Joseph advanced in his position, even as a slave. He took the position where he was in. This is the hand I've been dealt. I'm going to still serve the Lord as best I can.
John,
Glenn.
I think a good way to see somebody's faith is when they're put under a stressful situation. When they've been dealt a tough situation, how they respond to that. That's when you really get tested.
Yeah.
People watch. They're watching how you react. They know you're a Christian. Then they want to watch, well, let's see what he does when this happens.
Yeah, Bart, are you hearing him okay? Bart?
Yes, I am barely.
Barely, okay. Well, that's why I didn't know if I wanted to repeat. Glenn was saying one of the ways that people can see your faith is how you react in highly stressful situations. You know, and people do pay attention. I know a couple of years ago when we were going through a very stressful time in our family, you know, my oldest brother said to me, he was impressed by how we handled things, and he said, I want you to know people are watching. People were watching to see how we handled a situation and if we handled it in a godly way or if that was just lip service. Gigi.
Well, just in our class, like Joyce going through a very, very hard time. And she always has a positive attitude, sweet attitude. She's not whiny. She's not saying why me. And that God's peace is on her, and it's obvious to see that.
Yeah, Glenn or Len.
I'm just curious, how many of you have ever been in a stressful situation and you have not acted in a godly manner?
Never once. Never once, Len.
You're asking for a friend, right? You're asking for a friend. Think about how do you feel after that when you have time to reflect back and take a look and see?
Oh, I feel awful.
I'm terrible at that. Well, I really do that. Is really the Holy Spirit telling you really messed up.
Before I became a born-again Christian, I had a good buddy of mine at Samtech, Danny Bosing. I've told you about him many times. He had one of those situations one time where he kind of messed up a little bit. And he not only went and apologized to the person persons that he had this blow up with, but I sit next to him and he apologized to me. I'm sorry. I go, what do you apologize to me for? She goes, well, I should behave better than that. You know, and he was trying to influence me. And he wanted to make sure that I knew that what he did was not acceptable. That's, you know, so quick repentance is definitely one of those things. Do you think Potiphar noticed the blessings on his house? He had to, right? Absolutely he did. So thus he left everything in Joseph's hand and he rose to the top. Now, it took a while. So how old was Joseph when he got sold into slavery? He was 17. In chapter 41, which we'll get to next week, he was 30 when Pharaoh promoted him. Okay, but it also in chapter 41 says that he spent 2 years in prison. So he was there for 11 years. I want you to think about that as we go forward. You know, when you read the Bible, a lot of times, you know, it gets compressed and you think that, you know, okay, here he's sold on this day in the slavery and he comes to the Pharaoh's house and, you know, Potiphar's house and all these things. It just happens sequentially and it happens rapidly. We don't always read those things the way they are. But the fact is, he spent 11 years with Potiphar. You know, that's one of the things that I've noticed about people in business is their overwhelming desire to grow quickly. They see people around them. You know, I had people that were, you know, trying to compare themselves to myself or my brother. They've been at Samtech 3 years. Like, I've been here 25 years. What are you talking about? You know? And a lot of times in business today, we get a lot of people that are overly anxious. They want the rewards right away. They're not willing to work as if unto the Lord, and they're not willing to be patient sometimes. So 11 years, I want you to think about that too as we talk about some of these other verses. So it took a long time. But you know, the advancement's from God, and it doesn't always come quickly. And sometimes it doesn't come quickly because there's things that we need to learn along the way. You can't learn the things that God wants you to know overnight. You know, can you imagine if I joined this class and after 2 weeks I said, Len, you know, I'd really like to teach your class, Len. I've been a Christian for about a month and a half now, and I really like to improve my stature inside your class. Well, Len would have thrown me out of my ear. You know, I was here over 10 years before anyone asked me to teach, and I was scared as could be. But we seem to want to rush the timetable in life a lot of times. I want those immediate rewards. Oh, and by the way, when I have a bad time, I'd like those to go quickly as well. Okay? I'd like to sit on top of the mountain all the time. Then the last verse of that section, in verse 6, so he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food he was going to eat. Now, I don't want any snide remarks about the food. You know, clearly I worry about food. But think about that. You have got someone so much in control of everything in your house, in your business, wherever, that the only thing you worry about is what you're going to eat. That's pretty impressive when you think about it. So the answer, you know, did Potiphar notice the blessings? Yeah, absolutely, he noticed. Now, the end of verse 6 says, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So not only is Joseph a hard worker being blessed by God, he's also handsome in form and appearance. But I can relate. Anybody can relate to that? Okay. Did you ever watch a movie and you notice that the camera lingers just a little too long on a face in the crowd? Or there's a knife on the table and it lingers for just an extra second. And you know something's going to happen with that knife or that person in the crowd or whatever. And that's, when I read this verse, that's the first thing you got to think of. Uh-oh. Out of the blue, he tells you that Joseph was a beautiful human, beautiful in form. Why? Well, we're going to find out why in just a second. Literally translated, it says Joseph was well built and good to look at. How would you like to have someone describe you like that? Well built and good to look at. Never gets old when I hear it. Yeah, Patsy, you can stop saying it now. Okay, just stop. Yeah. The entire Bible, the entire Old Testament only refers to 3 other men as beautiful. Anybody know where they are? David, Absalom, Saul. Saul is described in that way. It also says that Moses was a beautiful child, but evidently he got homely later because they never said that again about him. Now, understand there's nothing wrong with being physically well-built or handsome. I've already told you that. But these attributes become unique temptations. Here's a man who had just about everything. He's control of everything. He has fame, power, authority, respect. He was, you know, here's the house servant. He had his own private quarters, access to confidential information, complete trust of his employer. On top of all that, he's a good-looking man who, without interest in doing so, caught the eye of women. You think Potiphar's wife is the only one that looked at him in that way? Don't think so. And Scripture wastes no words, nor did Potiphar's wife. Bart, go ahead and read verses 7 to 9, if you would.
Okay. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?"
All right. So what is she really saying? The Bible is pretty tame here in saying, you lie with me. Hey, come to bed with me. Let's have sex. That's what she's really saying, right? I think most other people would have been caught off guard and at least momentarily been flattered, or maybe even gave into that temptation. But not Joseph, not even for a minute. Without hesitation and with absolute security in himself and in God, he responds with equal boldness. And that is something that we need to make note of here. She was brazenly bold with him about come lie with me, and he is bold in his response to her. Okay? So remember, literally, Potiphar is the eunuch of Pharaoh, where we read in verse 1. So maybe his wife was feeling deprived. Perhaps Potiphar was a eunuch. Maybe their marriage was just a ceremonial arrangement. Maybe she felt that she was free to explore sexual pleasure outside their marriage. That attitude's pretty common today, is it not?
Open marriage.
Well,
Open marriages?
Potiphar was okay with it.
Maybe he was.
He didn't seem overly upset about it. He had to do something.
Well, hang on to that thought. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But we were watching the end of the PGA and what was that, 2020, some murder mystery thing with on CBS was on. And the girl had arranged to have her husband killed because she was having sex with dozens of other men. They found through this history of digital stuff, and she wasn't cheating with one guy. She was cheating with a whole bunch of guys and looking for an accomplice to take out her husband. That kind of attitude in today's world is pretty common, unfortunately. And it also seems that in ancient Egypt, there was low moral expectations on women, even married women. It was assumed that a woman would have sex outside of marriage. Potiphar's wife wasn't looking for a relationship. She's just looking for a good time. And the typical gender roles are reversed here. She's the aggressor. She's the one that's in power and the one who sought the inappropriate relationship, while the man was particularly good looking in a vulnerable position as a servant and the one who said no. Now, let's look back at that. Joseph gives her 3 reasons why he's not going to sleep with her. He says it would be ungrateful to betray his master who's treated him so generously. That's a person who's got a right attitude about their job and where they are in life. I can't do that. I can't betray. I remember a long time ago, I was on the road making sales calls, and I had some buyer at a pretty sizable company that was dropping all these hints about, oh, it was bad weather last night, my TV went out, and it just seemed like a bizarre conversation to have with someone who's making a sales call on you. Well, okay, I'm a little bit slow, but I'm not stupid. He was hinting around that he wanted us to get him a new TV as part of doing business with him. And I stood up, packed up my briefcase. There was briefcases back then, not backpacks. And I told him, I'm sorry, I don't do business that way. And I go back now, when I was on the road, I had to come back to Sam Shine every week and tell him about the trip when there. And now I've had the weekend to think about it. I'm starting to worry, maybe that's the way business is done. Did I screw this up? And I'll try to keep it in the cleanest language I can. But basically, Sam says, tell him to pound sand. I don't need his business. We don't do business that way. And from that day forward, I knew I was in lockstep with Sam Shine on how he liked to do business. And that's where Potiphar is with Joseph and vice versa. So he's not going to betray his master. Second was, she was the wife of another man. And then the last one was, adultery is a sin against God. Now I have a question for you, because the last reason is of particular interest. Joseph lived literally centuries before the 10 Commandments were given. How did he know that adultery is a sin against God?
Holy Spirit.
What's that?
Holy Spirit.
Okay. Anyone? Ken? So Joseph would have been keenly aware of what God's standard. Okay. Did I see a hand over here? No. Yeah, one possible answer could lie in Joseph's use of the word Elohim. That's the universal name of God when he's talking to Mrs. Potiphar. Everywhere else in these chapters, it talks about the Lord. Okay. That's a different word, obviously. Adonai. That's the word for the Lord. It reflects a more personal relationship. When he's talking to her, he uses the word Elohim. In other words, that was probably a practice in that world, in the Egyptian world, that to have sex with a married woman was wrong. And so he uses the universal word of Elohim to her to say, it's wrong in your culture, it's wrong in your God's and my God's eyes. So he didn't need 10 commandments to know that it was wrong to sleep with a married woman. It does raise another interesting question, though. If the woman was single, would Joseph have said no? I think the easy thing is, I think he would have said no. But circumstantially, the situation could be a whole lot different if she was single. But the thing we learn about Joseph is that he is definitely a man of God. Remember, he's not 17 anymore. He's been there for a while. Bart, let's go ahead and read verses 10 through 12.
And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house.
All right, the first thing I want you to notice is she spoke to him day after day. Think about that. That temptation is before him day after day. You think he could have upheld against that kind of temptation? I think it just blows my mind to think that Joseph was that good looking and could be tempted day after day after day for years, maybe as long as 11 years. Okay, that she's been talking to him and trying to tempt him. He shows remarkable faithfulness. Joseph shows remarkable faithfulness resisting that temptation. Have you ever had that kind of temptation? Not necessarily even a sexual temptation, but have you ever had a temptation that was in your face day after day? Marv, you have?
No. That's exactly what marketing is all about. You know, when you market something, you do it day after day after day until you finally convince the person to buy that product. That's the same situation.
With Hostess Cupcake? You're comparing Potiphar's wife to Hostess Cupcake. Okay, I'll buy that. I get it. I get the analogy. You can only withstand that marketing so long before, I'm going to have a cupcake. Becky.
That's why I think like Vice President Pence and Billy Graham and Bob Russell, they realize it doesn't have to be someone speaking to you every day, but that it's better to put yourself where there's accountability and be above reproach so that
Have that in place day after day. So these kind of things. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a lot of people who do that.
But,
I think Satan works overtime to try and get prominent Christians to fall. Jerry used to say all the time, and he said, ladies, if you're standing on a street corner and it's raining, I might give you an umbrella, but I'm not going to invite you in my car.
yeah.
And really, quite frankly, there were people trying to reduce the resistance, and that's why we see so many prominent pastors. I
I believe, fall.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame how often we fall to temptation, and yet it's a Joseph is such a wonderful example of keeping his eye on the Lord. Bob Russell, the same thing, and he put those things in place to make sure that he wouldn't stumble or wouldn't have temptation be in his way. Yeah, I'm sure we could probably list a whole bunch of them, but we also list a whole bunch of ministers that have fallen to that temptation and sometimes paid for it. But that's another story. So Potiphar's wife knew that Joseph was avoiding her. She's coming in day after day, and now she's got a plan to really trap him. One of the things it says, it just happened on that day he went to the house to do work, and none of the men of the household were there inside. You think that's a coincidence? She has cleared the house. She's made it so it's just, if you're going to give in to temptation, now's the time, because there's nobody in the house except for her and him. So she's trying to set a trap for him. Now, it says he resisted this tremendous moment of temptation when he ran outside. What was it that Paul said to Timothy in his letter? Flee also youthful lusts. You know, sometimes flee really does mean flee. Run, get out. And that's exactly what Joseph has done. You know, the problem we have is sometimes we don't always run away. Sometimes you can be flattered with the temptation. Someone is smooth talking you, and all right, maybe you're not saying, but you like to linger in its presence. Joseph wasn't lingering in the presence. He literally runs out of there. Run away from the lust of the flesh. The King James Version says in Genesis 39:12, he left the garment in her hand and fled, and got him out. So here the image is that she grabbed his thing, but this says he left the garment in her hand and ran away. Okay? He probably knew what was going to happen next. Bart, let's read verses 13 to 18. Bart, you there? You're still muted, buddy.
Okay. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house.
Go ahead, through 18, Bart.
Through 18. She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. And then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house.
The Hebrew servant. What is she doing here? Think about this. Okay, so she's got his cloak, right? He left it with her. And when she talks to Potiphar, what's the first thing she says? That Hebrew that you brought into our house was trying to make sport of me. Kind of sounds like Adam in the garden, doesn't it? Yeah, that woman that you gave to me, made me sin. And it's just interesting how people think in stressful moments. You ever been accused of something that was a total lie? Yeah, I have. And usually when things are a total lie, it's pretty easy to refute. But it still makes you wonder why someone would tell a total lie about you. But that's exactly what she's done. Now we know why she's doing it. Okay? When talking to the servants, Potiphar's wife accused Joseph of coming to lie with her. Underline that. She later uses a different verb when she recounts the incident to Potiphar. Okay? Trying to make sport of us. So when she's telling the servants, he tried to have sex with me, but when she talks to Potiphar, he's trying to dally is a word that some of your translations might use dally or make sport of us. That's exactly, so she's changed her story, the words in her story. If he really tried to have sex with you, why didn't you tell Potiphar that? And why do you think she told him, first of all, that Hebrew you brought in? Why do you think she told him that? Well, the stigma of his race. And what do you think she might have been expecting Potiphar to do? Probably just kill him. Because, listen, he's a slave. He's not a person, he's a slave. So if I make this accusation, he can just go away. And it says in verse, Bart, go ahead and read verse 19 if you would.
When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger.
Okay, now here's the question. Who did he burn with anger against?
I say his wife.
You think this is the first time this has happened? Maybe not. Yeah, I think the fact that, and we're going to see it here in just a second, the sentence that he is given is pretty benign compared to what could have been. She's looking for the death penalty, that Hebrew slave who's a nobody. And yet Potiphar has such a high opinion of Joseph that he really takes it easy on him. It says, so Joseph's master took him and put him in jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in jail. So his punishment's pretty mild compared to what it could have been. You think that a slave accused of attempted rape in any other situation wouldn't have been put to death? Perhaps the fact that Potiphar let him off easily implies that he didn't fully believe his wife.
Well, he had been working with him for
11 years.
It was absolutely contrary to anything that.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the things we're talking about in business. If someone accuses you of something and you've got a history that says that's not the way, I don't care what anybody accuses you of, that's not you, it's known pretty easily. But yet he had to do something. Okay? Al?
It seems like what he did was to save face, not to destroy Joseph.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was probably more about him saving face, but more importantly, saving an asset to himself and the kingdom. Joseph had already proven himself, okay, to be a tremendous. He didn't worry about anything except what he ate. And how many? You ever have an employee like that? You didn't worry about a thing except what you ate. I mean, that's really saying something. You know that Genesis doesn't really record any dialogue between Potiphar and Joseph, because Potiphar maybe he was afraid to hear the other side of the story. Maybe he'd find it convincing, especially given Joseph's status in Potiphar's eyes and the way he'd worked for him so much. So he's furious, but I think a lot of his fury is at his wife for initiating the whole thing. I saw one comment that says, poor Potiphar. He was left with his wife and without Joseph. And that's really true. He made the whole household run. Spurgeon says this. He says, he never said a word that I can learn about Potiphar's wife. It seemed necessary to his own defense, but he would not accuse the woman. He let judgment go by default and left her to her own conscience and her husband's cooler consideration. This showed great power. It's hard for a man to compress his lips, saying nothing, when his character is at stake. So eloquent was Joseph in his silence that there's not a word of complaint throughout the whole record of his life. That's pretty remarkable. I can't say that, and I venture most of you can't say that either. So Joseph went from privilege to his father's house, to the pit his brothers threw him in, to being property in the slave market, to the privilege of managing Potiphar's house, to the principled stand against temptation, to the perjury of false accusation, to the prison of Pharaoh. Bart, go ahead and read verses 21 to 23.
The Lord was but while Joseph was there in the prison, The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
So there's a couple things I wanted you to notice in here. First of all, he's almost immediately put in charge of the prisoners in jail. You think Potiphar said anything to the jailer? I bet he probably did. Doesn't say, but he sure went to the same kind of status that he had under Potiphar he's got while he's in prison. The other thing I want you to notice, the Lord was with Joseph. All right, here we are in a bad time again, and it's contrary to what we normally would think a lot of times. But in his distress, now he's in prison, the Lord was with him and extended grace to him. Some of your translations may say kindness. The chief jailer didn't supervise anything under Joseph's charge, just like Potiphar, because the Lord was with him. You think the jailer saw that in him as well? I bet he probably did. You can't turn off what Joseph has in his godly spiritual life. You don't turn that off. It is 24/7, and people notice that right away. So if God blessed Joseph in the pit, he was going to bless Joseph as a slave, and I'm not surprised that he blessed Joseph while he was in prison. None of those circumstances changed or defeated God's plan for Joseph's life. The dominating theme is that Joseph succeeded because of the blessings of God. Regardless of his situation, being sold into slavery, being put in jail, thrown in the pit, or anything else, the Lord was with Joseph. He was a successful man. That's in 39 verse 2. The master saw the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all he did prosper in his hand. 39:3. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. 39:5. And even after he's falsely accused and thrown in prison, the Lord was with Joseph and extended him mercy. And then in the last verse, the Lord was with him. Alvin.
One of the things that is pronounced in the Bible throughout the Old Testament is that God is in control. Even when in Babylon, when the king was saying, I did this and I did that and I did something else, and nobody's going to stand against me. And then God says, I'm the one that decided that you were going to do this.
Yeah.
I'm the one that determined you were going to do this. Before Cyrus is born, or 100 years before he's born, he says, Cyrus is going to he's going to do what I want him to do. Have we come to a point in our Christian life that we are willing to wait for God to do whatever he's going to do?
Well, we've had this conversation many a time on many lessons from myself and Len and Bart and yourself. Yeah, I think we rely so much on our own self. And I've told you this before. If you look up the word prayer, okay, in the Greek, and if you look at the antonym, what's the opposite of the word for prayer? The word means self-reliance. And I think that's where we're at many, many times. We're so self-reliant. We have the money and means and everything else to get ourselves out of trouble or anything else that we really don't even call on the Lord anymore. Not so with Joseph.